Okay, Joker voice while sick. I'm sure that'll go over totally fine.
You got him! You expert rootin' tootin' eagle-eyed goth marksman son of a bitch! You banked that batter thingy right off the pipe. Oh God, I love it. You managed to find a way to win and still lose.
And enter Joker laugh, what I won't do because my sinuses are trash. Anyway, that's originally how the Under the Red Hood story, just called Under the Hood initially, was written to end. Jason Todd, killed by Batman, who just finished a monologue about how he won't kill the Joker because killing is evil and he won't be able to stop himself. And then he kills Jason Todd and he doesn't continue killing people. I think he's a lying bastard. Anyway, I came across this example while I was doing research for my second book, Comic Accuracy. I'm just kind of buttoning things up. I'm currently about 3 chapters deep into it. If you include the preface, which I generally don't. So we'll say 2 chapters. And this is just something I wanted to bring up. People talk about comic accuracy, and of course I get into way more detail in the book about how that's a myth. It doesn't really exist. What they really mean is it needs to emulate how they specifically, as an individual, perceive a character or a setting or a storyline. But that it doesn't necessarily mean that story, right? Like people, they harsh about Batman v Superman. They're like, oh, no, no, no. Like you can't do the death of Superman. He did it all wrong. Like, yeah, you're right. If Zach wanted to get totally comic accurate, A, would be set in the 90s. B, Lex Luthor would have an Australian accent, a full beard, a full head of hair, and be in the clone body he made for himself while claiming to be his own son. But if you did that, people wouldn't praise you for comic accuracy because that doesn't emulate how they see Lex Luthor. It's not how they remember the death of Superman. They probably remember the animated adaptations that have happened over the years. You know, the one back in the day, it was like, I don't even think it was part of the official DC animated like series, like the Superman animated and all that. It was like a totally different cast, if memory serves correctly. And then the more recent New 52 inspired one did their own Death of Superman. I thought it was pretty good, actually. Or even Superman and Lois, they did their own version. And again, it's different because this Superman and Lois story takes place way into Superman's career. His doomsday is Bizarro, and he's a dad with 2 sons. Very different setup. Also, prison biker Lex, very different. But people will say that this did comic accuracy, and they don't mean comic accuracy, they mean personal preference. They mean this, I liked this, and I need a reason to say why I prefer that over this. And a long time ago, we came up with this fake term that we use to label media because nerds aren't very good at articulating their opinions, it turns out. And, you know, as the Avengers movies debuted and the Dark Knight trilogy comes out, and then the Mark Webb Spider-Man movies are kind of finding their footing, for better or for worse, we've got all these people with these different opinions on like Dread and all the other popular nerd media that's suddenly like the forefront of the entertainment industry. So what do we end up with? We end up with people who, instead of saying, I liked this because it was a good depiction of a hero's journey, or I think that fundamentally this character represents this ideal and it was well represented here, or I didn't like this because that writing was bad or that performance was hammy, or I think this twist should have come later on in the movie. I think it gave itself away too soon. These are all valid criticisms. These are ways to articulate how you really feel, and they're still largely personal preference. Film, TV, comics, video games, they're all a subjective media. It's an art form. It's an expression of ideas made by a collaborative team, meaning that the thing that you see as the sacred tapestry, right? Like your version of the character, maybe it's based on a specific comic even. The comic had to get approved by editorial, which means that the author had to change his opinions and the artist had to change his art. It means that the original script had to be adapted into comic panels, which were penciled and inked, and then they were lettered. And any types of changes based on the timetable, who was available, maybe someone had to drop out suddenly. These are things that happen quite frequently in the comic industry. That all changes the comic book you get in your hand. But when you get it, as far as you're concerned, that's just the adventure that hero goes on. And yet, largely, when we look back on things, people largely reference the animated adaptions or the movie adaptions. You know, it's all these things that people nowadays will say. You know, people talk about Marvel characters, and largely they talk about the MCU versions to the point that Marvel Comics have started retconning character stories and changing character costumes and even changing the way characters are written to be more like their MCU counterparts because they know that that is the most broad spectrum appeal version of the character. Is it the version I like the most? Almost never. But from a business standpoint, I understand how someone who is struggling to be a small slice of a pie that sells maybe 7 million copies of comics every month wants to get in on the bigger cut of pie of movies that make hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office every year. So, anyway, this is just a fun little back and forth thing. It's not part of my debunked series. It's not part of anything else. It's just like a thing. It was just fun. I thought I'd dust off the old Joker voice. I'm horribly sick, so no, it's not that great. No, you're not going to get a Joker laugh. Um, but yeah, I did that voice one time for Kevin Conroy. He thought it was pretty funny, so that's a fond memory of mine. Anyway, stay warm out there. My God, it is it's cold out there. And remember, comic accuracy is a bullshit term made up by nerds who don't know how to articulate their real, genuine criticisms or feelings. Sometimes there's nothing to be critical of. Sometimes you just don't vibe with the story. It's that simple. You don't need a special word for it. Just say, it's not my vibe, man. Glad you enjoyed it. Peace be unto you. Go on your day. I guess you could say, be a little bit more like Superman.